Meenal, can you hear me? Hi.
Hi. I can't see you.
What?
I
You
think
can't
you'll
see
have to
me?
turn, yeah, I think you'll have to turn your camera to you.
Oh, I can see myself.
Oh, okay. Why can't I see you? Hold on.
Can you see me now?
No. Can others? Okay, Shruti is saying I can see both of you. We can see
Okay.
Shruti. I can't see you. Man, hold on. Uh, okay, how do I do this? No, I can't still see you. Can I leave and join again?
Yeah, try that.
Okay, let me see how do I do that. I still can't see you, yeah? Can
Maybe we
can others,
continue with.
yeah, can others see the both of us though?
I could see you earlier, but now I can't even see you. But let's see.
Oh, um, okay. You can see yourself.
I can see myself, yes.
Okay. Um, hmm. Uh, Guys, can one of you let us know if you can see both of us on screen? Anybody who's joined, if you can let us know. Okay, Rashmi is saying yes. So should we just continue? Maybe we can see each other later.
Okay, if people can see us, that's great enough, I think. Um, okay. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining, and thanks Meenal for being here. And we're going to talk about this book called Just Transformations: Grassroots Struggles for Alternative Futures. And Meenal and I, we will talk about our respective chapters and briefly also introduce the book to all of you. Um, and before we do that, we'll just also introduce ourselves. So I'm Srishtee. I'm a researcher, activist, writer, and I work at the intersections of social environmental justice, more than human governance, and rights of nature. I am part of Kalpavriksh, Vikalp Sangam, and Global Tapestry of Alternatives. And I'm super excited to be having this conversation with all of you. And I'll now hand it over to Meenal to introduce herself, and then we'll introduce the book and our chapters. Meenal, over to you.
Thanks, Shrishti. Hi, everyone. My name is Meenal. I am a lawyer and a colleague of Shrishti's at Kalpavriksh. Uh, my area of work has been forest governance, forest rights, women and pastoralism, and now recently also carbon and climate change. Very excited to be here and to actually have this conversation with Shrishti because after the case studies were over, we really haven't had the time to sit and chat with each other. So this is going to be very interesting for the both of us. Um, nice to be here. Happy to be here.
Yes, awesome. And so, just to also briefly introduce this book, this is a book edited by Eugenia Rodriguez, Mariana Walter, and Leah Temper. And this project, in a way, began at the backdrop of what we are all living in, climate crisis and ecological social crisis, and began with environmental justice folks trying to understand why are these crises happening wherever they are happening and mapping all of those across the world. But along with that, a strong movement among various communities and peoples across the world in trying to challenge a lot of these crises and transformations and systemic alternatives emerging across the world. And so this project tries to bring together many of these crises, but also communities trying to articulate different visions of development, different visions of well-being, undergoing transformative processes, saying that there is another world possible, and they are creating that at that very moment right now their everyday lives. And so it has case studies from India, Turkey, Belgium, Lebanon, Argentina, Bolivia, Venezuela, and Canada of local environmental struggles and also social movements that are playing a very important role in resistance as well as sustainable, equitable, just transformations. So, what Meenal and I we will do is that we will talk about our respective chapters, and I would now like to invite Meenal, who wrote the chapter along with Shruti Ajit on articulating visions of the Raika women and their struggles and what it meant for them and what are their visions of the future. So I won't talk about so much what is there in the chapter that Meenal will do well. And I hand it over to you, Meenal, for maybe about 10-15 minutes if you can reflect on what the chapter spoke about and also the transformations that are happening at the region. Yeah, over to you.
Yeah. Thanks, Srishti. Um, so, one of the things, like you said, that we were focusing on in in this project was to actually look at why do people have the kind of responses that they have to the current development paradigm. These are local communities that we've been engaged with for many years, and they are articulating a very different vision of what they see as development, what they see as quote unquote vikas. Um, that is sort of the mainstream idea of vikas that is kind of sort of thrust on them in a lot of cases. And for us, it was interesting to see a community of pastoralists. Usually, if you see these kind of articulations, they come from indigenous people in India, Adivasis. So for us, it was very interesting. We saw a biocultural protocol that the Raika community had prepared in 2009. Um, very within a few years of the Forest Rights Act coming into existence. And that document was a fascinating document in terms of really understanding how pastoral communities shape the landscapes that they travel across. And that's the reason why we decided to go there. But when we went there, we sometimes, as people who work with communities, as people who are researchers, we forget that the term community is very it's not an all-encompassing entity. There are segments and sects within communities that often get sidelined, get sidelooked in this work that we do. And it was almost a revelation to us when we went there that there were no women around. You could see the women everywhere, but when we were having discussions, when we were talking to uh, the community, there were no women sitting there. They would never take part in any discussion. And so it was very important for us to understand that if we are looking at what makes this community respond the way it has, then we do need to talk to the women. We do need to talk to the young people, and that is how this community, this idea of sort of documenting their visions and their worldviews came into existence. And it was quite a interesting process because we'll talk about it later also. The the larger sort of study was already looking and working with communities across the world who have had a very strong response and who've already articulated their vision. And the biocultural protocol, while it did talk about what the community wanted, it a major part of the community's voice was missing. Um, and for us, it then this study became uh, just trying to understand how to ask the women to talk, and how to really understand where they are coming from. So we kind of did we went with this whole idea of having focus group discussions with the women, and these amazing transformative methodologies that we had, Shrishti will remember, we had really broken down, and we used to sit and have these discussions about what are the methodologies that we should use. But when we went into the field, we had to discard everything because the women don't come together. They don't sit in groups. There are no spaces for them where they would want to engage in conversations like these. They're super busy. And so we had to then change our entire methodology to actually go and talk to them individually. And that meant being able to establish some sort of trust in us. They didn't know who we were, they didn't know why we were there, why we were coming, where we were coming from. The kind of questions that we were asking were also so abstract. And so we had to really redesign our entire questionnaire to be able to just listen to their life stories. And that is what we did. We went to 4 villages near in Rajasthan, in Pali district, and we spoke to the women. And it was really interesting because there were certain aspects that really stood out in the case study when we talk about transformations. I think one of the aspects was um, the way women engage with their surroundings or nature. Um, and I think for us, it was extremely important to unlearn what we had learned in our sort of years of work with communities before, is that we had begun to see these spaces, to see forests as very as spaces that were multidimensional, yes, but multidimensional in ways that communities use them for collecting fodder or grazing, um, or say collecting minor forest produce, or okay, yeah, they have cultural and spiritual ties with the forest. But a lot of the women said that these were spaces of peace for them. These were spaces where they could go to and just be. And Shrishti, you know, as women, how important that is to have a space for yourself where you can contemplate, where you can think, where you don't have the things that are expected out of you following you all the time. And for me, that was something that really came out very strongly as to why uh, women need their forests and women need their commons. The second aspect that came out really strongly was how this community has been able to forge relationships with other communities around them, and this is mostly done by the women because they are the ones who are talking to the others when the men go out, taking the animals for grazing. Sometimes they are the ones who go with the husband on long migrations and with the family, but a lot of them also stay behind to take care of the children, to take care of the animals. And how they forge those relationships with different communities is something which is very, very interesting to us. The third aspect is about transformations, right? And if you actually look at the community on the surface, it seems that nothing much is happening in terms of um, some really groundbreaking struggle or where they are coming out in large numbers and they're protesting and they're resisting. But there are the small things that are happening in the community which kind of um, make you to look at transformations in a very different way. So, for instance, um, one of the women that we were speaking to said that it's so important for our kids to know this dhando, they called it the family business of grazing. And it's important because they go out, they diversify their livelihoods, they go to cities, but they go there with limited knowledge of what it means to survive in the cities and limited knowledge because they are from childhood they know that one or two kids are going to go into the cities. They don't really study that much, or they're in a complete state of flux all the time, and they are neither able to adjust to life in the cities nor able to learn what it means to be a herder. And that really causes problems amongst kids. Their sense of identity, their sense of belonging gets a little bit sort of scattered. And it's very important that they learn this art. And this actually started being very closely articulated when we were talking to the communities during COVID. A lot of people, a lot of young people had to come back because of the circumstances in the cities to their villages. And so many people, the community really stood for them. Where flocks, they gave them flocks, and these people are not don't necessarily want to return to villages anymore. So how we see transformations has also kind of shifted a little bit with this case study. The third is, I think, um it is a heavily patriarchal society, and some of the stories the women really opened up to us, and especially some of the things about the agency of women, young women and older women also. Some of those things were particularly, I think, I think, very close to our hearts because they really opened up to us, and there is a need um, in each of our societies to really understand what kind of rules and what kind of regulations we are putting on our women and our young people. Um, in in some ways, those rules may have helped shape pastoralism, but in the changing times, I think it is important to understand that women have their own feelings, they have their own needs, they have their own ambitions, um, and how this community is going to come to terms with that. Right now, there is constant friction, but there are interesting ways. You see, a lot of changes happening even amongst the older people in the community. Some fathers that we spoke to, some mothers that we spoke to, who were very keen that their kids get get a life which allows them the choice of doing things. So I think from this case study, I think we learned all of these things. We had to unlearn a lot of things because both of us came from work with Adivasi communities, and we had to go into a community that was a pastoralist community. So how they look at things, how they view landscapes is very different. So I think this case study kind of brought that out, and yeah, it was an interesting sort of um, uh, interesting exercise, and we continue to talk to the women now to be able to take this ahead. But yeah, that's how this case study is shaped. I hope that people will read it whenever they have the time. But Shrishti, I was very interested in your case study and your experiences while doing the case study also, because Korchi right now is in the midst of, you could say, in the midst of a transformation, right? With what is happening there, with all of the mining licenses, and we just heard how we've been hearing for the past few months how local communities there are um, not just there but across Gadchiroli are really fighting to save their resources and to save their lands. So I'd like to know how it was for you um, when you were doing this case study. What were the experiences, and also that you, especially that you all use the alternative transformation framework. If you could also talk about that through your case study, it would be really nice.
Yeah, thanks, Meenal. And I think that was one of our biggest learning, that transformations are not static; they're continuously happening. And I know that when we went about transformations, it felt like, oh, that there are things that happen and things change and then they remain like that. And there were so many moments during our internal discussions and, of course, with the people on the ground, that there was nothing static about transformations. It's like a spiral. Things go down and then things come up, and there's a constant friction, constant dialogue happening about transformations. So the current situation in Gadchiroli is reflective of that transformative processes. And when we began Gadchiroli, it was primarily we focused on South Gadchiroli. And we realized in the process that it was so difficult for actually communities to be able to engage in a process where we were trying to talk about well-being. So if we don't want this kind of extractive development, what kind of a development we want? And people really wanted to have that space, but the firefighting, the constant suppression, the constant fight against the mining companies, all of that was so difficult for communities that they really didn't have the time or wherewithal or the capacity to be able to have this discussion on what are these worldviews. And that's where our initial exploration was. And so in the process we realized that it has to be a very much a co-produced work. And so what our objectives are have to be complemented by people. And so that's how we moved to Korchi, which is where people had that at that moment, about 5 years ago, had the time, had the interest, and they really wanted an exploration where what all they were doing could be documented by people, because there was this fear, as you were saying, also within the Raika communities, that young people are forgetting their culture, their tribal lifestyle, and also not interested in these processes that were happening at the ground. And so they really wanted a process wherein they could document all of this, and through that also explore this idea of what we mean by transformations, what do we mean by well-being, what do we mean, what are these worldviews and philosophies that we are talking about. So this chapter, just for everyone's who's listening in, this chapter that we wrote on the cusp, reframing democracy and well-being in Kochi, for this book, um, is co-written with my authors Nima, Pathak Broom, Mukesh Shinde. And when we wrote this chapter, it's a brief chapter of a long report that we wrote that kind of documents the entire process that the people in the Korchi region are doing. But our idea of doing this one was to highlight the kind of direct democracy processes people were able to initiate in Korchi Taluka. It's a taluka of about 12 districts in Gadchiroli, and primarily by Gond Adivasis living there who are dependent on forest for their everyday lives and livelihoods. And this region has had a long history of struggle and a long history of fighting against injustice and organizing as a response to those struggles. And so when we went there, our idea was to, of course, understand all of these struggles and understand how all of that has informed the current movement and struggles and has led to the kind of transformations that are happening in Kochi. So to just give a sense of what this chapter covers is the process, the backdrop of these struggles. The second is what Korchi as a region came up as a process of transformation. So while their sacred forests were up against, they were proposed for mining, the people felt that uh, despite of two decades of strong resistance against mining project, we also need something that can change at the ground level. So if you're saying we don't want mining, we need a stronger process to articulate what we want. And that could only happen if we federate, if we come together. And so they formed about a federation of about 87 village assemblies to first gain control over their forests through the Forest Rights Act and getting community forest rights recognized under that act. And so all of them, actually 87 village assemblies, got those rights. And with that began a process of, okay, how do we take decisions? How do we decide what happens in these forests? How do we conserve? How do we manage? And what was really interesting for some of us to go through and understand this conversation about um, what do we do now, was some internal reflections that happened within the communities. So Meenal, you would remember that we had this conversation of about within our teams, that how it was so interesting that people, when were talking about justice outside, they were also reflecting what justice really means inside. And so this conversation about the internal injustices that happen in communities, extremely patriarchal societies where women don't have any sane decision making. How do we transform that? And I remember this conversation that we had when one of the indigenous women activists from Korchi, Kumari Bai, she said that we are fighting for against injustice from the state, and that we can, of course, we continue fighting and we can resolve. But what about injustice within our communities? And we need to fight for that as well, because you can't fight just injustice somewhere and not fight it within your communities. And so the process of federating of women within that whole process was really inspiring for me, especially to see how women took control of decision making processes and became a voice within the Mahagram Sabha, the federation that they had formed of 87 village assemblies. And for us, I think was really crucial, especially for me. What was inspiring was how people started defining community. And Meenal, you were also reflecting on that idea. And I remember this conversation that we were having with another very senior, extremely wise village elder. Um, who I asked, you want to, why don't you go to this, why don't you go to the city, and government is offering you so many jobs, mining companies offering jobs. Why don't you go to the city? It's much better, right? And he said that, we can go to the city, all of us can go to the cities. But what will happen to the spirits in the forest? What will happen to the birds and the animals that live inside this forest? And at that moment, it completely flipped in my head, that what does community mean? I mean, for me, going from the city, community is always meant for humans. But for people living there, community was so much broader. It had more than humans. It had animals, birds, spirits, everything part of it. And that was an extremely like life-changing experience, and it has informed so much of the work that I do now. because of how people saw communities, how people saw transformations itself. And I think another thing that completely kind of flipped for me was about how people people let the ideologies move into their communities, of how they were never really closed, of how open they were, and they had such intense deliberative processes of discussions, of discussing everything, from as small as, I mean, as deep as, but also as small as, maybe in some ways, that we use iron ore, also, like we have our bikes, we have other equipments that are made of the content that comes out of mining. So then how do we protest against mining? So all of those really deep, intense philosophical discussion of relationship with the government and state, which we think, happens outside in academic spheres, but there people living there, doing farming and living everyday life, were doing those discussions. And so it was really inspiring to see those deep philosophical discussions happening all the time. And through that, actually, we tried to understand what are these worldviews that people are trying to articulate, how they see the forest, how they see the land, which is very different from, say, how the administration sees it, how the government sees it, how, of course, the mining companies sees it. And so it was extremely interesting to also figure out what was the role, what were the enablers of these transformations to happen. And some of the very interesting things were that education played a very important role. So some of the activists who were involved in this initial transformative processes had a process called Jeevan Shala, which is school for life, wherein they would just go in the forest and learn about the forest and what is there in the forest from their elders. And that really informed and their love for forest, and then actually fighting for it. Then also we found that the role of external actors and NGOs and people from outside, people like you and I, do play a role in facilitating some on-ground conversations, in enabling some sort of transformations. We also saw that district-level study circle processes that have been happening in Korchi for about 3 decades now have really transformed the level of information that people have about acts and policies, but also how to use them. And that has plays a profound impact on the local transformations. And so this long struggle of movements of, Jeevan Bachao, Manav, Jungle Bachao, Jeevan Bachao, Manav Bachao Andolan, and several Indravati Andolan of protecting the Indravati River against dam. All of these movements have really informed the ground struggles, and we see movement and their success in such a linear fashion. But these on ground struggles inform that it might not succeed in the way we modern individuals identify success, but they succeed in many other ways because they have so many ripple effects. And the community life and the culture that people, the Adivasi struggles have had since the time of Birsa Munda, but also so many other struggles, has really brought those articulations and worldviews at the foreground. And so, yeah, it was personally extremely transformative a process for me, because I saw life in a different way. So I think I also, as an researcher, as an activist, as a woman, I really transformed in many ways, and I'm so grateful for the communities that welcomed us in. And I was also so grateful for the community within Kalpavriksh and the whole acknowledged gang that we had, of bringing such wisdom and knowledge and grounding us in this, this kind of understanding of transformations. And as you were saying, bringing, totally turning it upside down in many ways of how we understand so many things. Yeah, I think that is about the chapter, and about also the case study and some of the things that I personally experienced during the process. And I was wondering, Meenal, if would like to reflect upon this co-production of knowledge that happened through the process. Like, if you want to reflect upon this, case studies from different parts of the world, and what really that added to the book as well, but also to our understanding of transformations, and why we need to do it at a global level. How are these struggles connected?
So I think that was the beauty of this entire work that we did, was that one is that there were so many similarities across the rest of the world, but also that
Yeah.
that researchers and as well as activists and people like us were have been thinking of ways in which research can be meaningful, where it doesn't just get stored in libraries across the world, but it can actually be used by communities to not just to not just in their struggles and resistances, but also to transform themselves. So
Yeah.
I think what was very interesting was how one of the editors of the book, Yokine, who works with a community in Venezuela, um, came up from her doctoral research and years of working with this community in Lomerio, in Bolivia, actually came up with a framework uh, called the transformations framework, and how it looks at power and how power
Mm-hmm.
changes hands and changes meanings, and how they've done it with the help of the community. So they have used methodologies like photo stories, um, voices of local people. Um, in many cases, they have also enacted their own stories, so that not so that they themselves and community and young people within the communities don't forget, but the larger world doesn't forget what they've been through. And I think that was very interesting to be a part of. Um, just to also say that the film that we made in Rajasthan was a very interesting process for us, because the women we had decided that we will always go back to whoever we spoke to and share the outputs, right? Because that was part of how this study, how we had envisioned this study. And when we went back with pieces of paper, they were like, "This is ridiculous. How are we going to even read this?" And so we had very shaky footage, that Shruti and I had we used to carry our camera everywhere, and wherever we could, we would just start taking videos. And people are really, I mean, the camera changes the dynamics completely, but at the same time, we managed in many parts. And then they were the ones who told us that you make a film, make an audio visual output, make it so that people really understand what women in this community are going through. And we ideated the script, we shared the script to the women, we also went back, showed the film to each and every woman who was part of the study. They asked us to make certain changes also. So it was very, I think, for for a person who does research and for a person who says, "Oh, I work with communities," this was a very important learning, that anything that I do, and anything that is going to come out of the work that I'm engaged in, I am not the author and I am not the source of the inspiration. It is the people who I've been working with. So you have to ensure that these people um, co-produce this knowledge, and that they can use this knowledge in the future. So these were some really exciting. I think you guys also filmed. You all have produced 3 films out of your work in Korchi. So I think
Yeah.
it was important to for us personally, for me to know that this is one of the ways and the most important ways um, of doing research. It has to be co-produced.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
Bhavna is asking if the film is available. Yes, the film is available, and it was so amazing, Meenal, that the film was viewed by so many people from the communities, and it has, I guess, thousands of views that are primarily by people themselves, and it's really powerful when people relate to movies that are about them and actually find resonance. So it was really great that you guys made that film. And
Yes.
I
So
was also just wanting to
yeah.
reflect on the idea of this being like a international project. And one
Mm.
one very interesting element emerged when we were having this dialogue between the Korchi folks and the folks in Venezuela, the ones that you mentioned, your Kenya has been working with, and so the similar struggle of protecting their forest and trying to come together to manage their forest, and when both the communities spoke. With multiple translations of Spanish, English, Marathi, Hindi, and all of that. And whatever little they could understand after so much of things being lost in translation, they felt I remember Izam Bhau from Korchi saying that we feel that this is all happening to us and we are alone in our struggles, and just realizing that somebody so far who can't understand us but is also going through a same struggle,
Yeah.
really feels like we are in solidarity or we are together, like we are not alone. And I thought that was so powerful, because so many times, even when we are personally facing so many issues, we feel okay, it's us, that's it's only happening to us. But then once you're sharing, once you're connecting, you realize it's also systemic and it's not really us, it's so many communities across the world. And that's why we have to be together in struggle, we have to be standing together in transformations, and how do we strengthen these solidarity networks becomes so important.
Yeah. And y'all have been, I mean, we've been trying through Kalpavriksh and Vikalp Sangam to do that, right? To have these
Yeah,
spaces, like you said, for community exchanges. So we also had a worldview Sangam, and it was
yeah.
rooted in in the case studies that we did. That we need to have these spaces where people can exchange and learn from each other, and also um, weave those solidarities across the thing. It's interesting that you say that, because when we were having one of our meetings and we presented the case study, it was Kumari Tai from Korchi who said to us that, I didn't realize that pastoralist women have to go through so much. And we try to
Mm.
drive them away from our forests, but now I won't be able to do that. I'll have to speak to them and ensure that they are part of the Gram Sabha decision making. And to us, that was, we hadn't even thought that this would happen, and that it and it and when it happened, it was just so overwhelming for the both of us, because um, yeah, it's important that people meet each other and are given the space to really hear each other's stories.
Mm. Yeah, you're very right. That's thanks for reminding me that. Yeah, that was so powerful, and especially because of the kind of dynamics Adivasis and the pastoralists have. That's really, yeah, it's amazing that she said that. So I'm wondering whether anyone in the audience has any questions, any thoughts that they would like to share with us. Else, Meenal and I will move towards concluding this conversation, and we will of course share links and links to the book and to our chapters and other material that has been produced specifically to our case studies. And it will be posted on the Vikalp Sangam platform. There's the website that you can explore, Kalpavriksh's and Vikalp Sangam's also, that we'll put in the information about the case studies. But any questions, any thoughts, if people have?
I think there are a few people who have written some. Uh,
Can you see it somewhere?
yeah, I'm just trying to go through the chat. Yeah, no, there isn't anything.
Okay, I think Bhavna Bora is asking something. Okay, how can we connect with all of you to learn more and be part of such communities? Well, sure,
Mm.
Bhavna, we can put in our information if you want to be connected. as I mentioned, we are part of this group called Kalpavriksh and part of this network Vikalp Sangam. So you can also reach out to us, and the information should be available. But if not, we'll make it available in case you want to specifically connect with any one of us.
Yeah.
Okay,
Also,
so if there,
just to add, Shrishti, the book that we are talking about is available for download. We can share the link on the comments. And also, it will, if you want a hard copy, it is available for on a discounted rate till October 2024. Um, so, so do let us know if y'all want to access it, and we'll be able to share that information as well.
yes, perfect. Okay, so thanks everyone, and thanks Meenal for this conversation. It was
Thank
really nice to have that, and maybe we should do it properly actually within the group of also just
Yes,
reflecting on these case studies.
yes. Oh, the interconnections between case studies were fascinating. Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay,
Okay, thanks
Shrishti.
everybody.
Thank you,
Bye.
everyone. Bye bye.